This message title is A Radical Message Calls for a Bold Response. This is a message for Pentecost. The Bible tells one continuing story from Genesis to Revelation. It's a story of God's love for the whole human family. And to understand the story as it unfolds in the Bible, it often helps to refer back to earlier parts of the story. A place to turn for today is in the book of Exodus. In Exodus 24, Moses goes up on the mountain and is there for 40 days and 40 nights to meet with God. Later, Moses comes down from the mountain with the Ten Commandments. This is in Exodus chapter 32. In Acts 1, Jesus, after the resurrection, spends 40 days with his disciples. Then he goes up to heaven to meet God. Then a few days later, in Acts chapter 2, the Holy Spirit comes in Jesus' place to be with his people on earth. And while Moses brought down 10 commandments, Jesus gives just one. A new commandment I give you. Love one another as I've loved you. So in summary, Moses goes up the mountain, meets God, comes back with the 10 commandments to guide Israel. Jesus goes up to heaven, sends back the Holy Spirit in his place to guide the church. There's nothing tame about Moses meeting God on the mountain. According to Exodus 19, there's thunder, lightning, loud noises like a trumpet, fire and smoke, and later apparently an earthquake. Something similar occurs in the book of Revelation when John encounters God. In chapter 4, verse 5, out from the throne, lightning flashed, voices sounded, thunder rumbled. And before the throne, 7 lamps of fire, which are the Holy Spirit, which are the 7 spirits of God, the Holy Spirit. These two stories of Moses and John as they encounter God point us toward the disciples' encounter with the Holy Spirit in Acts 2. A violent wind comes sounding like a tornado. And some have said that a tornado sounds like a freight train. And then there are tongues of fire on the heads of the disciples, much like the burning bush in Exodus 3 when God appears to Moses, and like the 7 lamps of fire representing the Holy Spirit in Revelation 4. These images of a violent windstorm and flames of fire picture God appearing as an awe-inspiring, life-changing event. God gets our attention and shakes us out of our complacency. Maybe it's something like surviving a close encounter with a tornado. Then, as if this was not enough, the disciples begin to speak and are suddenly able to communicate in other languages. It's symbolism of God bringing the whole world together to hear the announcement of the good news of his love. This universal message of God's love shakes things up, much like a tornado or fire or an earthquake. At Pentecost, these first disciples are all shook up, and the Spirit's wind blows them out into the street. They are driven out to where their message can be heard by others. There's nothing tame about God's love. Nothing tame about a man suffering and dying on a cross. Nothing tame about the resurrection because, well, dead people stay dead, right? Not that time. Nothing tame about a tornadic wind chasing folks out into the street to announce God's love for all. Jesus says, "Love one another as I've loved you." There's nothing tame about the Christian message of love, and it calls for a bold response. And any day can bring unforeseen opportunities to be bold in sharing God's love with others. Recently, Krista, a middle school teacher in Idaho, rose to the occasion when a sixth grade girl pulled a handgun out of her backpack and started shooting. 2 students and a custodian suffered non-life-threatening injuries. Krista directed students to safety, rushed to aid one of the victims, and then she encountered the shooter. She calmly approached her, took her by the arm, disarmed her, and began hugging her. Krista continued to hug the girl, to continue to console her until the police arrived. Krista later said she knew the girl had a mom somewhere who was not aware that the girl was in crisis. She just tried to let the girl know they would get through this together. COVID shows us the whole world is one human family. For us to remain well, we need the whole world to get well. We can't build walls high enough to keep diseases out. COVID teaches us that we can take nothing for granted and that what matters most in life is one another. There are many ways to share the Pentecost message of love. For some, it may be to forgive someone and to call on the Holy Spirit to help you. Remember, with God, all things are possible. The wind and fire at Pentecost means the impossible can be possible after all. Blessings.